Hi. In this lesson, we're going to look at the concept of value. The objectives for the lesson are to help you understand what value refers to, what is high value, what is low value, understand contrast and how it applies to value. So knowing what a strong contrast is, and what a weak contrast is. It's important to understand value because that is what allows us to see and understand the images in a two-dimensional work of art. So what is value? It refers to how light or how dark an area is. Now, we would use the word contrast to describe the value. I'm sure you've heard the word contrast before. In your English class, you may have been asked to compare and contrast different works. Comparing is looking at the similarities. Contrast is looking at the differences. Now, you can use the word contrast to look at the differences in anything. You could look at the differences in personality between two people. That's a contrast in their personalities. You can look at a contrast in texture. Something smooth, something is rough. So the word contrast applies more to just value, but it helps us here to understand the differences in value. So contrast in value helps us describe the differences in light and dark. It's also the contrast in value that allows us to see edges and shapes in the images of an artwork. High value kind of refers to a higher amount of light. This brings us closer to white. So a high value is closer to white. Low value, on the other hand, is lower light, darker. Low value brings us closer to black. This is a simple value scale ranging from 1 to 8. You can have value scales that go from 1 to 4, value scales that go from 1 to 100. The amount of area in the value scale is not as relevant as the differences from one area to another. To understand these differences, we'll use the word contrast. So in looking at area 2 and 3, there's not much difference there. They're very close in value. We would call that a weak contrast. In area 8 and 1, that's as strong a contrast as you're going to get, black and white. It's a very big difference in value. So a strong contrast, an immediate change from light to dark, this is how an artist defines the edge of a shape. Strong contrast represents the outside edge of an object. We would use a weaker contrast, a more gradual change in value from high to low. This would represent the curving surface of an object as it curves in space. The light will fall on it a little differently. So value changes help us feel the roundness of an object by showing us how the light is hitting it, how the shadows are formed. It helps to let us know where the light is coming from. As artists get good at using this, they can start to create a very realistic looking image. Using contrast and value is a good way of showing light, showing reflections, and showing shadows. In this drawing, the artist has a very strong contrast between the high value on the side of her face and the very low value in the shadows of her hair. This helps define the edge of her face. Compare that to her forehead. Very weak contrast in value. A gradual change from the high value in the center to the lower values on the outside edge. This shows the gradual curve of her forehead. He does the same thing on the nose. Look at the subtle changes in value. Now, color and value are very closely related, and oftentimes they can get confused. Value can also apply to a color. color has lightness or darkness. Now, there are some pure colors, like yellow, that are very high in value, close to white. Other colors, like blue and red, are much lower in value. So let's convert these colors to black and white, and you can see what their values are. Now, A and B are actually the same color. They're both red, but A is just a higher value. Pink is basically just a high value of red. It's not a separate color. It's a different value. So while B and A are the same color, they have a strong contrast in value. Now, B and C have a strong contrast in color. Red is much different than blue. But they have almost identical values. So we would say that's a very weak contrast in value. C and D, strong contrast in color and a strong contrast in value. So when you're creating art, you should always consider the value before you consider the color. If you get the value correct, you can experiment with the color, get very creative. Of all the elements in art, value is the most important if you want your brain to accept the image as real. Think about black and white movies and black and white photographs. You still consider them to be very realistic, even without the color. The benefits of knowing how to manage the value are very important to the artists. You might never consider using purple as a skin color, but if the value is correct, it works. Your eye accepts it. What color is the skin in the shadows of this painting? Purple. Light affects three-dimensional objects in different and unique ways, and artists have to work hard to reproduce the effects in their work. Even though the drawing or the painting is flat, you can start to create the illusion of three dimensions by knowing how to apply light and dark. So that's about it. I hope you have a little better understanding of what value is and why it's important and how you can use it to help create a more realistic looking image.